Okay, thank you. Just to acknowledge that climate change has been affecting Zimbabwe, and most of the climate change impacts on water supply and food security in the country, and the need to adapt is quite prudent so that all the sectors of the economy plan for a more resilient future. So for UNDP Zimbabwe, we've got three priorities. The first priority is to ensure that all the key economic sectors are resilient and they're reducing emissions and are resilient. And this is being done through in promoting resilient communities. And the second priority is the renewable energy infrastructure and improving access to renewable energy for the vulnerable communities, especially focusing on the underserved communities. Then the third priority is ensuring that we've got nature conservation and restoration of degraded ecosystem and landscapes through supporting protected corridors and biodiversity corridors in Zimbabwe. Then the fourth priority is on ensuring institutional and policy reforms in different sectors so that we effect transformative change across the areas of focus. And I think for UNDP, the focus has been on supporting policy change, the policies that have got to do with climate change adaptation, and we've supported quite a number of policies, and starting with the most recent one, the National Energy Efficiency Policy. We've supported the policy strategy documents, the National Clean Cooking Strategy documents. We've supported the National Insurance Policy Strategy documents for rural insurance infrastructure, the climate change policy, and many other climate-related policies in the country, just to effect some systematic and transformative change in the area of climate change adaptation.
Coming to the UK government, how is the UK government supporting climate resilience and low carbon development in Zimbabwe, particularly in alignment with the national priorities?
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. So tackling the climate crisis is a top priority for both the UK government and the Zimbabwe government. And as you know, and as we just heard briefly, Zimbabwe is very vulnerable to climate shocks like floods and droughts, which are increasing in their frequency and their severity. And so the UK and Zimbabwe has a very strong partnership to tackle climate. And I would say there's three areas. So we work together on adaptation, that's helping build resilience of local communities to cope with the shocks of climate change. Mitigation, that's helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then I would say climate finance as well. So helping Zimbabwe access greater climate finance from entities like the Green Climate Fund or even carbon finance. And in terms of alignment, you just heard from Solomon, actually we're very aligned with things like the National Adaptation Plan, with the Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDCs. So absolutely we work as the UK government in line with and supporting those policies in Zimbabwe. And one of the flagship projects that we're implementing very much in partnership with the government of Zimbabwe and with the UNDP is CAWAB, which is the Climate Adaptation Water and Energy Program, which is helping very climate vulnerable communities to strengthen their resilience to climate shocks through improving multi-use water, access to water, which is for productive uses, also access to renewable energy like solar, and then also through early warning systems, so having better access to climate and weather information so they can better anticipate and respond to weather shocks. And one of the highlights of that program is actually the Hakwata mini grid in Chipinge, which is a 200 kilowatt solar mini grid. It's the largest off-grid mini grid in Zimbabwe, and it's contributing 10% of Zimbabwe's NDC target on mini grids access to energy. So we're really proud of that partnership that we have together. It's also rehabilitated and improved and climate-proofed a dam in Wanezi in Nsiza district, which is, again, building resilience of the communities there. And then just to mention a few other things that we support as the UK government, obviously food security is a huge issue in Zimbabwe, particularly when you see things like the El Nino-induced droughts last year. So we partner with Foundations for Farming, which developed the Pfumvudza concept. So we're helping to train agri-tech officers in the Pfumvudza climate-smart agriculture approach, which will then train farmers across the whole country. 1.5 million farmers will be trained across all provinces. And this is a really fantastic homegrown solution from Zimbabwe where you can feed a family from 1/16 of a hectare over the course of a year with very, very little need for water. So we're very proud of that partnership as well. And then the last one to mention is we support My Trees Trust, which is another local organization in Zimbabwe. So protecting nature and restoring nature is really important as well, and deforestation and land use change is one of the main drivers of carbon emissions in Zimbabwe. And so with My Trees Trust, we're helping to restore forests and plant indigenous trees. Their target is to plant 1 million indigenous trees every year. So we're supporting them in various parts of Zimbabwe as well to restore indigenous forests as part of our contribution to reducing greenhouse gases. And then finally, obviously energy. On the more commercial side, we support British businesses to come and invest in and strengthen solar energy and renewable energy here in Zimbabwe.
Okay, so it was already done so far. In your view, what are the most critical enablers for scaling up sustainable climate adaptation initiatives, especially in vulnerable communities?
Sure. So really, I would just want to emphasize the importance of partnerships. I mentioned it already, but I think partnerships with government and with communities, and I really think the COWEP program is a really good example of that, where right from the beginning, before it was really designed, together we consulted with government on different locations, and we consulted with local communities on what their needs are, understanding their resources available and how we can support them. So I think the importance of partnerships, particularly in those local areas, this is not something we as the UK come in and decide we're going to do this in this place. We talk with the government at the central level, the local level, and the communities to make sure that it's meeting their needs and understanding their situation. So I think that partnership is really important, and the Hakwata mini grid in Chipinge is a really good example of that. I would also then secondly say partnerships with the private sector. I think, I mentioned finance. I think for us to achieve scale and sustainability, we need finance, and the private sector has a key role in that, whether it's investing in the infrastructure itself, or it's the, let's say, access to energy that unleashes the private sector to then create economic opportunities in those communities where maybe there weren't economic opportunities before. So I think partnering with the private sector, and there's something around creating the right enabling policies to really help unleash the private sector. And the last thing I'd say is, I think there are low-cost solutions. I mentioned Pfumvudza, which is a fantastic homegrown solution in Zimbabwe. It's not expensive. You can do it in any part of Zimbabwe. And so I think knowledge sharing, that's a great solution we can take to the world. We can also learn from what people have done elsewhere in the world. So knowledge sharing about these kind of appropriate and low-cost solutions is really important.
Coming to you, Solomon, the UK government has issued a Hakwata mini grid, which I want to believe they are doing that in partnership with UNDP. How is UNDP promoting the transition to renewable energy in
Okay, thank you very much. So UNDP is guided by the Just Transition principles when promoting renewable energy in the rural communities. So in simple language, we're just saying, how are the communities benefiting from transitioning from unsustainable source of energy to more renewable energy? So for riding on the example that Martin has given on the Akwata solar mini grid, right? Were to look at how the communities are going to benefit. So the approach that we use is to have a productive use approach, where we don't just establish technically and engineeringly something good, but something that will be used to transform the lives of the people. So the approach for the establishment of that solar mini grid was actually informed by the productive use focus, where we are saying, how are communities going to benefit economically from the solar mini grid? So there was deliberate effort to build the capacity of the communities so that they've got the capacity to utilize the electricity generated by the solar mini grid. So we had over 200 households trained in vocational skills training so that they can actually have skills to do welding and other productive uses of that energy, right? Even the biogas digesters, it's not just about having clean energy, but how are they going to benefit from it? So they're going to benefit solar, clean energy, they're going to, where we have reduced drudgery in terms of very long distance travel to acquire firewood. So those just transition principles are actually guiding us, emanating from the cost-benefit analysis of adopting the renewable energy. Then we're also talking about the triple nexus approach in implementing renewable energy in terms of, this is renewable energy for agricultural development, renewable energy for water pumping, potable water and irrigation development, so that we minimize the trade-offs in promoting irrigation schemes. For example, for the Kawe irrigation scheme, the three of them, we're having a hybrid pumping system where we've got solar as the main pumping source, and the grid is just a fallback in case they want to pump during the night or they want to pump when it is overcast. That is when they will have the grid to pump. Otherwise, the main source of power is the solar, all right? So it minimizes the trade-offs, where at times when you just pump using diesel and other unsustainable sources of power, we may actually realize that the cost of agricultural development becomes heavy on the environment. So that's the kind of approach that we actually have. Then the other approach is we're catalyzing a private sector investment in renewable energy. All right. So for the Akwata mini grids, we're actually promoting private sector investment in that grid so that we can actually have a stronger envelope on the electricity that is being generated. So in a way, we have got a sustainable mechanism, because if you don't have commercial use of the generated electricity, you have challenges in sustaining that in the long term. So that's quite an embedded kind of strategy in the whole process. Then moving forward, we're actually saying we have established the solar mini grid, and it is actually supported mainly by the parastatal, the road electrification agents. And the next approach now going forward, given the opportunity, was to ensure that we have the private sector taking the major role in the whole process. Then we just subsidize the critical areas, maybe the feasibility studies, and maybe supporting the productive use, supporting the productive use by the communities, but with the major cost being tackled by the private sector and owned by the private sector, run by the private sector. And to that effect, we've muted a solar mini grid investment forum, which will actually ensure that we will have a forum, the private sector company will actually come there, and we will discuss about the gray areas, the loopholes that have actually been affecting or all the risks or the challenges that are affecting private sector investment in solar mini grids and other renewable energy initiatives. From there, that will actually inform how we can actually promote private sector investment in renewable energy. Then the other aspect is deliberate targeting of the youth and women, especially when it comes to the utilization or productive utilization of the generated electricity. Because if you go to the rural areas, the women, they constitute almost the majority of the population in the rural areas, and the youth. And if you also look at the impact of climate change, is heavy on the women, is heavy on the youth. So deliberately targeting them will also ensure sustainability of the renewable energy infrastructure and other related productive use infrastructure anchored on the renewable energy infrastructure. So that's the approach that we're using. And I think the major one is the one that I've actually mentioned, that we're taking a transformative approach where we're promoting energy efficient utilization. We're also promoting policies that have got to do with renewable energy and energy efficient utilization, the promotion of investment, which means it's not just promoting establishments, but attracting investment from all corners so that we've got sustainable ways of upscaling whatever proof of concepts that we would have demonstrated. Like, for example, the Akwata mini grid. That's a proof of concept. The private sector having realized that it's doable and the benefits are glaring. It's a demonstrated business model which the private sector can actually run with. So this is how the approach that we are actually using to promote renewable energy investment in both the rural areas, peri-urban and other urban area settings.
All the initiatives and the projects that you are doing in Zimbabwe in partnership with both local and international institutions, what are the lessons or best practices that can be drawn from these partnerships in advancing climate action?
Sure, thank you. So I think really combining a range of interventions is really important. So not just doing things in isolation, but actually helping improve access to water, access to energy, early warning systems we've mentioned, combined with things like village savings and loans, associations, vocational training, these other things to help give communities the tool, a range of tools to help manage resilience and manage shocks. I think is, in terms of long-term sustainability, is really the best way to build that resilience to manage those shocks over time. And I do think the Hakwata Smart Green Village and mini grid is a really good example. Solomon's actually just reminded me of something, another component of that we haven't mentioned, I think, so having the local kind of really strong buy-in and ownership of these projects is critical from the start in terms of designing, but then really that ownership over the long term. We've created these assets, whether it's irrigation assets or energy assets. Obviously, we want those to last for a very long time, so the local community needs to really have ownership and look after those. But I think there's a really interesting component as well around insurance, a really interesting insurance component that's low-cost insurance that makes sure there's a fund that builds up that can cover the costs of maintenance. So the maintenance for things like solar infrastructure is a really important issue in any setting, and I think here having that money available so that if something breaks in the future, there's money to fix that, and maybe local expertise to fix that as well, is another part of the sustainability. So that's a really interesting lesson, I think, coming from that program. Also, I think just access to energy is a really critical enabler for a wide range of sustainable development goals. So if you design it well and install it well and have this strong community participation, it can really deliver multiple benefits for these communities as well, like health service delivery, educational learning conditions, or employment creation. I think supporting local businesses to create new enterprises that using the access to energy as a new opportunity, it opens up business opportunities that can generate employment and incomes in the local community as well, again driving sustainability and resilience. And then finally, I think the role of government and public financing is also critical. We've talked about the private sector, but actually the government's contribution towards CAWEB through the Rural Electrification Fund has really brought multiple benefits like reduced program costs, delivery costs, expertise, and strength and partnership as well. So I think, recognizing the important role government has to play in financing, and obviously we've talked a lot about that enabling environment, making sure the policy is right so that we can then help the delivery on the ground.
That is so about the petrol energy in Zimbabwe. And Solomon, how do you ensure that climate initiatives how do you ensure that climate initiatives are inclusive, especially for women and
Yes, so the need to ensure that the approach that we are using for climate action is inclusive emanates from the fact that there's a differentiated impact on climate change, gender differentiated impact, and also geographical differentiated impact. Right? So as I've actually highlighted before, the impact of climate change is heavy on women, is heavy on the youth, because there is also poor, less educated, fewer, limited economic opportunities. Yeah, so for UNDP, and exemplified by what we've actually done under CAWEB, we've got deliberate targeting of the youth in all the interventions. Because if you don't deliberately do that, because of the economic different economic status in the patriarchal communities that we are operating in, you actually have the youth and women excluded. So there's deliberate targeting of this group. Then there's also deliberate empowerment of women to take advantage of the investments that were promoting different initiatives. I've mentioned about the solar mini grid, right? I've mentioned about biogas digesters. For your own information, we've trained women to be builders of biogas digesters, right? We've promoted technical skills development for the youth. For the war project, about almost 1,000 youth have been actually trained just to take advantage of our investments in solar and renewable energy related initiatives. And for us to assist these vulnerable gender categories, the approach has been to use the wall of community approach, where we're saying we need to have the voice of the women, we need to have the voice of the youth from feasibility studies, from needs assessments, from the design of programs. What do they need? Because if you exclude their voice in the planning and the design of program, then whatever intervention will not really work for them. So we recognize the power of including them in the design, implementation, even monitoring if whatever we're doing works or is not working. Yeah. So that's the extent to which we've actually taken the whole of society approach. Then we also make use of the whole of government approach, because we've got government ministries, we've got government departments whose mandate is to ensure that they work with these rural communities. So we realize that under CAWEB, we're working with almost every government ministry. They will be engaged at different levels. Minister of Energy, Minister of Agriculture, all the departments, Minister of Education, and many other ministries, just to ensure that each and every government has got a role to play, and we're also building their capacity to ensure that beyond the project, they can effectively support these communities. So if you look at our reports, our focus was to build the capacities of the institutions that have got a perpetual existence, so that they can continuously support the initiatives beyond the project. Then we have talked about equity in line with the leaving no one and leaving no place behind. We're not focusing on these vulnerable gender categories, but also targeting the marginal districts, the most vulnerable districts. Talk of Dinga, right? Talk of Chipinge, the lower part of Chipinge. Talk of Insiza, and talk of Shivi, the most vulnerable communities in the country, which may not be a very cheap way of assisting these communities. But in pursuit for equity, we had to invest in that and deal with other poverty issues with these communities, but we managed to become more inclusive in pursuit of the leaving no one and leaving no place behind. Then the other also approach was to ensure that we mainstream climate change adaptation across the different sectors of the economy, all right? So after the approval of the National Adaptation Plan, as CAWEB, we've trained the different government ministries to mainstream climate adaptation across, and I'm happy that even the Minister of Finance has been actually talking about being informed by climate adaptation in the budgeting, right? So it's something that we have actually registered some impact, some impact. We also have that deliberate target, not only targeting of the youth, but ensuring that the voice of the institutions, the voice of the marginal communities in our planning is actually heard and it is fused in, is also integrated in the monitoring and evaluation to inform major programs, and also the private sector involvement, so that at least we've got every sector represented, and we've also an embedded sustainability mechanism, because if we're not involving the market, our chances of sustaining all these interventions will actually be limited. So the focus will actually be on the market, and we're helping the business sector in realizing the business potential in dealing with those at the bottom of the pyramid, so that even the private sector will also be inclusive, and they also realize on the deduce the business case of dealing with those in the rural areas.
Well, thank you so much, the UK government in Zimbabwe and UNDP for this insightful conversation, and also thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to be part of this podcast. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.